Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our 9th author of the semester this evening in our Writers, Speakers, and Ideas series. Although not true for tonight's guest, generally speaking, these take place on Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. and each talk or event lasts about an hour. You can find a list of these events at our website, Writers, Speakers, and Ideas, Lone Star College-Kingwood. And most of these events, and tonight's will be as well, are recorded and will be posted on this site. My contact information is in the chat box there, john.m.bar@lonestar.edu, if you want to get in contact with me about this or any of the other future events. Our next speaker will be in 2 weeks on November the 10th at 7 p.m. when we have on hand anthropologist Melvin Connor, both an MD and a PhD from Emory University. And he's going to answer attacks on faith by some well-meaning scientists and philosophers. An Orthodox Jew who has lived his adult life without such faith, Connor explores the psychology, development, brain science, evolution, and even genetics of the varied religious impulses we experience as a species. So that should be fascinating. Mel also happens to be a personal friend of mine, and I know it will be very, very good. But tonight we have on hand Katherine Persson, a colleague. She's still working for the university, a colleague of mine and a friend of mine, our former president. And I think it's appropriate at this point to say that Katherine Persson is the reason we have a Writers, Speakers, and Ideas series. It was Katherine's support over the years that made this possible. And she was always behind us 100%. In bringing whatever authors we could to campus to enrich the intellectual life of our university. And we're very grateful to you for that, Katherine. We're very, very much looking forward to this evening. So the format for this evening is the same as always. I'm going to introduce Katherine in just a second, and then I will turn it over to her. She will speak for about 35 minutes, and then we will take questions and answers from everybody. You can type the questions in the chat box, or you can type them in the Q&A box as well. Either one, and then I will read them aloud, and Katherine will answer them for you. So Dr. Katherine Persson became the president of Lone Star College-Kingwood in August 2008, after serving for 2.5 years as president of the Portland Community College Rock Creek campus in Oregon. She began teaching in anatomy and physiology labs part-time when North Harris College opened in 1977. Between her first position and being hired in '84 at the Kingwood campus as a full-time biology instructor, Katherine earned her master's degree while working in the Department of Neurobiology at the University of Texas Research Institute of Mental Sciences. As a faculty member, she helped develop the first Associate of Applied Science in Biotechnology in the entire state of Texas. While at Kingwood College, Katherine served as a biology department coordinator, Associate Dean of Science, Healthcare, and Applied Technology, and she was the Vice President of Educational Programs and Student Development. Katherine's educational background includes a PhD in Educational Administration from the University of Texas, Austin, a Master of Science degree in Biology from Texas Women's University, Texas Medical Center, Houston, and a Bachelor of Science degree in Biology from Texas State University in San Marcos. Katherine has also been deeply involved in her community, representing LSC-Kingwood on the Lake Houston Area Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors and on the Community Chamber of Commerce of the East Montgomery County Board, where she was the 2002-2003 chair. She's currently serving her 8th year as an elected director to the East Montgomery County Improvement District. Previously, she served as an elected school board trustee for the Smendora Independent School District for 16 years, 8 as a board chair. And while in Portland, she served as a board member for the Washington County Vision Action Network and the Beaverton Chamber of Commerce. In spring of 2006, Katherine was awarded the Splendora R.B. Tullis Community Service Award. She has been recognized by the University of Texas College of Education as a distinguished graduate and by the Community College Leadership Program as a visiting scholar and a distinguished scholar. She's been a Kingwood College Teacher Excellence Award winner and a Texas Women's University Research and Writing Excellence Award winner. After being nominated by her professional administrative assistants, Katherine was recognized by the Texas Educational Support Staff Association as the 2009-2010 Administrator of the Year. Katherine and her husband Andrew have 3 grown children and 2 grandchildren. She's currently working on a book about her experiences as the president of Kingwood College in recovering from Hurricane Harvey. And it's my honor to introduce her to everyone this evening. Thank you, Katherine. I'm going to turn it over to you, and you will or are now the presenter.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Barr. Wow, that was a long bio. You forgot that we have 2 dogs also.
Oh.
I also want to say thank you to Thomas Pape, and he's our IT techno guru who's going to help me out on WebEx if I should stumble trying to shift to a PowerPoint and even some videos that are embedded in the PowerPoint. So we're on a joint adventure tonight. I do want to say thank you for inviting me to have a conversation with you this evening about trees and about forests. As Dr. Barr explained, even though my first 2 degrees are in biology, they were not in botany. However, my hobby is gardening, and I'm an avid gardener, have been such for well over 4 decades. Besides, I've had many different experiences, both with architects and with construction contractors, and planning for new buildings and planning for those buildings whereby we spare the trees. So I can bring that to the table as well. When I was in Portland, Oregon, I also had the experience of serving on the steering committee appointed by the county to actually master plan the 800 acres around the college. And that was a venture that was very enlightening, unlike anything that I would have experienced in Texas. And in addition, I actually read that huge book, The Overstory. And so and it's a fascinating read. I hope many of our students will read it. I'll talk more about it later. Well, we often don't talk much about beauty and the good in this world and what's worth keeping and why. So tonight I want to just indulge me a little bit, and we're going to kind of go down that road. Okay, well, I wanted to start off with something that's just kind of awesome. So you really think about it, no 2 trees are exactly alike. I know there's a little bit of delay in doing PowerPoint when I press and when everybody else sees it. These are some scenes from my own memories. Actually, I bet everyone listening to this can relate to a fond memory that involved a setting with trees, whether there are one or many. And coming from geology parents that were married in Montana, and my older brother was born there, and they settled in South Texas. Both my parents were geologists. My father was a geologist and a geographer. And every summer they piled up the 5 kids in the station wagon, and we camped out all the way from South Texas to the Rocky Mountains, ending up in Lolo National Forest, which is between Glacier and Yellowstone. So it's really up there, and you can imagine what a treat that was, escaping the summer heat in South Texas. So these are just some of my fond memories around trees, but I've certainly had a lot of experience with looking at various forests and woods throughout my lifetime. We even had our family reunion there last summer, obviously pre-COVID. What a motley looking crew, I know. By the way, there's no electricity, the running water comes from the creek. So more about trees. The tree on the left is supposed to represent the Tree of Souls. Many of you probably watched the movie Avatar, and you might recall the Tree of the Souls was carefully guarded. It was revered by the Navi people in Ewa, and actually the story itself does have some biblical roots that go back to the story of Jericho. At any rate, what you see on the left is Walt Disney World's rendition of the Tree of Souls. So it doesn't have the willowy kind of bioluminescence that the tree did in the actual movie. But this one looks a little sturdier to do all kinds of other things. Then in the upper right-hand corner is the second oldest oak tree in Texas. It's about 1,000 years old, and it's located in Rockport on Goose Island. So it's huge. The oldest is actually in Brazoria County, but it's surrounded by other trees in a heavily wooded area, so you can't really get a cool picture of just a tree by itself. And then at the bottom, you see the forest. This could be a scene anywhere around here. You know, we're on the edge of the East Texas Big Thicket. So when you look at this forest, for many, it's inviting, enchanting. There are some forests, depending upon the light and how thick the trees are growing, that look mysterious. And think about how forests have played roles in various stories from The Wizard of Oz in terms of mysterious. It was looked at as what can it do to you? And it wasn't very nice. Remember the apples being thrown at Dorothy and her companions. But luckily, more and more scientists are looking at what forests can do for us, not to us. So as a community of trees, how do they behave? We know that they're a habitat haven for all kinds of critters, and we even see that around the campus. Many of you have probably experienced the invasion of the feral hogs. I couldn't resist adding this picture. This was taken with my cell phone as we were trekking up to the Rockies. And it's really part of the Yellowstone to Yukon continuous corridor that was made for wildlife. It's really a land agreement between public lands from the Northwest United States and Canada. And all along the freeways, they have fenced in areas, and they've also built either overpasses or underpasses for the large wildlife animals to literally get from one side to the other without taking their life or having their life depend on what kind of vehicles were going up and down the road. And when we were traveling along, I remember looking out the window and saw a black bear running, about a 400-pound black bear just running along the side of the fence with the traffic. You know, it was protected, but you don't see that every day. Can you imagine if we had something like that in Texas? Wow, what if all of our waterways and our watersheds everywhere, from the smaller tributaries on up to, let's say, the San Jacinto River, what if they all had sizable pieces of land that were used to preserve wildlife? They were nature preserves, and we could enjoy them to hike and bike in, but knowing that critters could roam free. They wouldn't be limited to just little pocket parks or pocket areas. And the reason that we're seeing so many critters invade the campus and other areas is because of the clear cutting, and they're losing their homes. Well, the closest thing we have to a conservancy is the Bayou Land Conservancy, and you can see some of its accomplishments. It is a certified national land trust. So, you know, it'd be a dream if we could ever have a continuous wildlife corridor. And that would show the value that we place on nature and wildlife and the importance in our lives. Well, in researching different resources that I wanted to bring into this talk, I ran across an article about the hidden life of trees, what they feel, how they communicate, by Peter Wohlleben. And this just looked very intriguing. I have not read the book. It's on my Christmas list. But you can see some of the quotes from the interview article that appeared in the 2018 Smithsonian Magazine, the March issue. And actually, Richard Grant, who wrote the article, noted in his talkings with Wolleben that trees of the same species are communal and will often form alliances with other species. Forest trees have evolved to live in cooperation, interdependent relationships that are maintained and communicated with a collective intelligence that is similar to an insect colony. So I thought that was a pretty good analogy, not one you usually think about when you look at a cluster of trees and an insect colony. Well, I've lived here for over 42 years, and as we've lived in this spot, we've worked and reworked our landscape around trees. In the left-hand corner, right behind the bird feeder, you see a stump. Unfortunately, a beautiful large white oak just died on us about 18 months ago, and we had tree specialists out to see what happened, and it was under attack from a bacteria, and there was nothing they could do to save it, even though we tried. Also wanted to point out that large tree in the background with the long trunk. I'm going to show you a picture of it in a few minutes and what it looks like right now. And so if you're good stewards and you take care of your trees, you're rewarded in all kinds of ways. And one of the things that was so fun for us was to see a red-tailed hawk build a nest in the four forked branches of one of the large oak trees. And you can see it on the right with its head just poking up. I'm the amateur photographer taking all of these pictures with my cell phone. So that's the disclaimer. This is that large sweet gum tree. If you look closely, you can see a lightning strike that goes almost all the way down the trunk. It starts at the very top of the tree, and that happened this August 31st. We were home and saw it and heard it. And two things are saving this tree. One is it seems to have jumped from the tree to the metal structure close to it. And the other is that it's a sweet gum. And sweet gums do not have straight bark. They're not desirable as a lumber tree. So the gnarly bark made the lightning just kind of jump from one part of the tree to another. And the arborist said both of those factors are what saved this tree. So luckily, that's not going to it shouldn't just die on us. But lightning strikes are very common in this area. I know with one of the last big storms at the college, we had 6 trees just around the college campus struck by lightning. So another job is, and it's one that we all should take responsibility, is stewardship of our public spaces, including the college. So this is a beautiful campus, no doubt about it. The picture on the lower right, I took in May. It's a picture of several deer, and they're actually in the area that we just walked the day before to map out as many trees as possible that we could save. We had already, by building the new health professions center, we had already moved the structure and the parking lot around several different areas and several different angles, trying to save as many big trees as possible. And my point there is if somebody doesn't pay attention to that, it just doesn't happen. They tend to be more trees are sacrificed just for the ease of construction crews. These are some of the questions that your professors might ask you after this talk. And so far, the ones that we've covered is the one on the bottom, do trees communicate with others? But there are lots of other topics to talk about with trees. So one of the many different benefits is that trees in the forest combat climate change. And you might notice the staggering stats just on what 1 acre of forest can do in terms of CO2 absorption and how much oxygen it puts out. So the map at the upper right is a map of the college. The blue lines outline most of the college property. And altogether, out of 274 acres, we still have well over 150 acres of woodlands, of forest. And so that's producing gas exchange for over 2,700 people a year. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? The American Forest put an article out titled Leading on Climate Change Solutions, and they noted that trees in metropolitan areas and small towns in the United States are responsible for almost 20% of the country's captured and stored carbon emissions. So that's pretty cool. At the bottom is, it perhaps is a quote, it's a fairly common saying or question. In the story, in the Overstory book, it is credits given to this saying as an old Chinese puzzle. When's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the next best time to plant a tree? Now. So yes, we do plant trees on campus, even though we're in the middle of a forest, we still do that. I hope some of you take advantage of your beautiful college campus. We have about 200 acres in the lowlands, and we have about 1/4 of a mile of granite walkways that are ADA accessible with 3 boardwalks and 2 observation decks. And so this is looking at one of the boardwalks that overlay a cypress swamp. But it's pretty obvious just looking at this. You can imagine how trees help recharge, their trunks capture water, their roots capture water. They take the water way down to the ground to recharge the groundwater. And certainly in this area, it's important to note that trees reduce flooding. All of these things lead to reduced floodings. And you can think how many times we've had major flood events just in the last 3 years. So, my gosh, we need more trees. We certainly don't need to see clear-cut areas. Other benefits of trees. I always feel sorry for the people that live in homes that have no trees around the whole house because their electric bills must be astronomical. Do you know that one large tree will increase your property value by anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000? This was obviously pre-COVID. So here's a scene of our, I can't tell if it's fall or spring fling, but students are enjoying the large quad, the shade from the trees, the beautiful scenery, the food, just a nice green space around campus. Another benefit from trees are the many different kinds of medicines that we derive from their products. Taxol, by the way, is one of the most potent chemotherapeutic agents, and that comes from the bark of the Pacific yew. Our lowlands for sure have all kinds of great diversity, all kinds of trees. And so certainly some of those are medicinal in value. Some we use in cooking. We have the native bay leaf, sassafras, all kinds of oak trees, pine, maple, mulberry. You could go on, but again, I invite you to visit the lowlands, go with a buddy. If it's warm, make sure you take mosquito spray. Well, when we look at a college, what's in it for us having green spaces, having trees, and trying to preserve as many as possible? A lot, actually. So it says a lot about our values. And if we value the outside of our buildings this much, surely we value what happens in a classroom. Students, and actually any visitor on a college campus, will form a first impression about that campus in the first few minutes. And you can see some of the things that are important to them. And even when you're in an inside space, it's important to have those views to outside nature. And we've tried to do that all around the college campus in every building. You know, pre-COVID, we used to socialize. And trees help, we're good conduits for helping us socialize, providing shady spots to mingle, or just even if you're inside to look out on the trees. Again, in doing research for this talk, one of the most, I guess, impactful videos that I reviewed was the one from Berkeley, and it was a talk given by Dr. Heather Tallis. And so if you just Googled Rethinking the Value of Forest from Timber to Water, Education, and Health, you'll find this. I don't know what happened to my my URL, but I can send it later. At any rate, this is about an hour-long talk that Dr. Heather Tallis, who was then the acting chief scientist at the Nature Conservancy, talk that she gave at Berkeley back in 2016. And so she starts off asking the audience about what benefits can they think of that trees provide and that forests provide. So some of the things that we just reviewed were already listed. And she said, you probably didn't think about how nature and trees could add 3 points to your math tests. Could also help reduce the number of deaths, help you live longer. So those were some things that she went into in her talk. And what our video genius, Thomas Papaya, did is take out the less than 2 minutes from this video I wanted to show you to emphasize a point, and then invite you to look at her video later on, her full video. Well, one of the things that, so Dr. Tallis first talks about the impact of education, the impact of green spaces, trees on education. And there have been quite a few studies that have shown that it improves adult cognitive functions, your ability to focus. And they've tested that before and after exposure and in many different studies. So she goes on to hypothesize would it have the same impact on a younger audience, on children. And they funded a study, a large study of fifth graders in 5 states, California being one of them, Texas another one, Chicago, Illinois and New York, and I think Florida. So that study started in 2016, or just before then, because they were already getting preliminary results from the California study showing that actual exposure to green spaces, green trees, not just a field, but things with more interest, so trees and shrubs, had a bigger factor on test scores than poverty did. And so they're following up. It'll be interesting to see when they publish the results of that study. And again, Texas is one of those states that are participating with fifth graders. Then in her talk, she also looks at the correlation between health and green spaces. And many of us are familiar with the revolution that's happened in hospital patient rooms, where they discovered, again, from the studies that were done, that green spaces make people feel better. It helps you get well faster. And so many hospitals have made a concerted efforts in remodeling, or when they build new wings, to build in garden views. So note that when you're going to visit someone who's in the hospital, look out their window and see what their view is. And she also cited an interesting study that had been done at the Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital in Boston. And it was a long-term study that followed 1,705 stroke patients for 12 years. And the graph that she showed indicated a significantly higher longevity rate for those who lived in greener neighborhoods. So again, building together, putting the pieces together of a story of how do trees and green spaces impact our health and our cognitive abilities. So I definitely recommend looking at that. Also, the Tree People published several articles, one that children with ADHD had fewer symptoms after an exposure with nature, after they went for a nature walk. We also know, and it's been also studied in many different fields, the influence of green spaces in neighborhoods on violence. And they know that violence is definitely greater in neighborhoods devoid of green spaces. And that's where you have violence that occur inside and outside the home. So all of those are just fascinating things that we're really just starting to ask questions about and understand the impact of nature and green spaces on our behaviors. So given all of that, if you walked around campus, would you think that we're definitely trying to lower your stress level? You should do better on your cognitive tests, including math. So students, before you take that next test, go outside, enjoy nature. We try to provide places all around the campus to do that. And certainly quiet areas where you can reflect is important. It rejuvenates the soul. There's also studies looking at the benefits of nature, but when you disrupt some of that with an actual structure. And here you see in other places around the campus, you see several sculptures. And those are thought to disrupt your brain activity so that you do have better recall and focus abilities. So I'm going to close by looking at this quote from one of the characters in the overstory. There are 9 characters that they follow all the way through from when their ancestors, often their parents or their grandparents, first started out, much like a root system. And then as the roots grew, they became a trunk, larger trunk, produced a crown, and near the end of life, the seeds. And so I just thought that this quote from Plant Patty, who morphs and becomes Dr. Pat Westerfield, was important to share. So I hope that the talk tonight plants seeds of awareness and knowledge about the value of trees and forests, and I hope it grows.
Carrie, and the question is this, Carrie Beal, how did you choose what to do with your life, one event after another? With all the opportunities you've presented with, it seems so difficult, and I'd love to hear how you chose what your next steps in life were.
I know that I'm not typical, and at least by the 7th grade, I knew I wanted to major in biology. I knew that I was going to study science. I thought I could find a cure for cancer. You know, you're very idealistic when you're 12 years old. Both my parents were well educated, and certainly I grew up in an enriched environment. So I went to, my first real job was at MD Anderson in molecular genetics. And I realized that I'm more of a people person. I'm not an extrovert. By the way, most in education are introverts. But I decided that research was pretty boring. You research it and you research it. You don't share anything because grants are so competitive. So there's no cross-pollination, or very little back in those days in the 70s. And so actually we had moved out to North Houston area when North Harris Community College had its first building, and it was just opening in like 1974, I think. And so I had one child, another one on the way, well, that next year, and I just wanted some adult company every now and then. So I applied to do something with the college, and only had a bachelor's degree, but let's just say within a semester, I started helping out in labs, and then I got to teach a class. And I got hooked on education and seeing the light go on with students. That's I felt like you were making a difference when you get to meet with students. And so my passion then was to be a teacher. And I went back and got my master's when I had, let's see, a 10-month-old, a 3.5-year-old, and a 7.5-year-old. And you can do anything when you know it's not forever. Short-term goals will get you further down the road. So having a master's got my foot in the door to getting a permanent position as a faculty member. And then I never wanted to go into administration. I love teaching. I truly love teaching. And we had a new president that was reorganizing everything. He's now our chancellor, Dr. Stephen Head. And true story, he actually threatened me, not really bribed, but he said if I didn't become an administrator, division dean, he'd bring in my worst enemy from sister college to be my boss. So that's what led to my administrative career. And in a way, studying things at a college kind of is like anatomy and physiology. There's all these different systems, whether it's student services or instructional or PR, that all have budget that have to work together for the health of the whole college. And so I found challenges in administration that I liked. These are people jobs, so there's always conflict. And if you're pretty decent at just talking and working through different problems and challenges, it can be a very rewarding, and it has been a very rewarding career. So I can't always say that I made conscious choices then, but it just kind of happened, and you just go with it. I never ever thought I'd be a college president. My sisters always said, because I was the oldest girl out of 4 and my brother was 5 years older, my sisters always said that I was the bossy one, so they were sure I'd be in charge. But anyway, I don't know if I answered your question, but you know, the more you work at something, the more doors open up for you.
Great. And Carrie, if you want to type in a follow-up, I'll ask that question for Katherine. Dr. Persson, this is from Jordan, and I think this is more a comment, but asking you maybe if you've had a similar experience. She says, my grandmother had been a gardener for over 40 years, not in the same sense as a forest, but the small orchid of persimmon she had been growing and now is prevalent throughout the fields around their home makes it so beautiful. So I think she was commenting if you wanted to talk about your own home and the trees around it that way.
Well,
that's from Jordan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I love antique roses. I love flowers. I have a vegetable garden, but half of it has flowers. So one side of the house, the sunny side, I put pathways, and I have about 65 different varieties of antique roses. And I have other things planted here and there for interest. I do a lot. I don't have a lot of time, working the job I did to keep weeding all the time. And my husband and I are our own yard people. And so I really concentrate on things that naturalize. Antique roses are more disease resistant. So I buy plants, lots of bulbs, things that are low maintenance that bring you lots of joy. So I wish I had some persimmon trees, but I haven't wanted to sacrifice some of the woods to plant, more fruit-bearing trees.
Thank you for that question, Jordan. This next question is from a guy named Steve Davis. And I think you know him. He says, given the proximity of our college to heavily wooded areas, a number of wildlife come onto campus grounds, possums, snakes, deer. Do you have a favorite encounter with wildlife in your years at the college you could tell us about? And Steve is also concerned about what's going to happen to such animals as their habitats continue to shrink due to ongoing development in the city.
First of all, thank you, Steve. Steve is a founding faculty member, as I am. And so we go way back. I too am worried about disappearing habitats for animals. And again, I think if we have enlightened elected officials that actually look at the benefit and can work with developers to help us create or help set forth policies and legislation to help us to create more and bigger continuous wildlife corridors, we would all benefit. Humans would benefit from that as much, if not more so than the animals. My favorite animal encounter, I've got several. Back in the old days, and let's see, this college started in 1984. And so about for the first 5 years, you could come to campus morning, evening, and see a herd of cows on the campus grounds, stomping over the plants. And there was always one, and it really was a jackass. There was one jackass with the cows. And the county commissioner at that time was Squatty Lyons. And the cows actually were Squatty Lyons, the local Montgomery County commissioner. He couldn't keep them corralled. He said that they know where they belong, but it's the neighbor's jackass that leads his cows over to the college property. So there wasn't really much we could do about it in those days. You just knew that you didn't challenge them when you met them on the road, and you left them alone. They did their thing, you did yours. So that's probably my favorite. We've had raccoons, and we have a family of raccoons several times on the college campus that have been fun. Some of the employees would feed the feral cats, but the raccoons enjoy the cat food just as much as the cats do.
Yeah. Katherine, aren't they, last time I was on campus, this is just a follow-up to that question. It seems like there's some development going on down at the bottom of the parking lot across from the CLA building on Sorters Road. Do you know what that development is?
That's when we added the 2014 bond approved, gave us the ability to build the Health Profession Center, because all of our healthcare programs are maxed out and we couldn't add any new ones. We couldn't grow them. And so we needed a new facility. So that's what the building was earmarked. And so the city of Houston, and we're in the city of Houston limits, have strict guidelines. When you build a building with so many square feet, you have to have so many parking spaces to accommodate it.
Okay.
And so we made the decision that it would be best to put those parking spaces across Sorters in the floodplain rather than tear down trees on the corner of Kingwood Place and Kingwood Drive. So what they're doing, and another thing besides parking spaces, is a detention pond. Because even though the San Jacinto River is just downstream, we have to put in a separate detention pond for the parking spaces. So at the same time, they're paving what was gravel space or crushed concrete over in that area, and that will help the future development of a fire science physical facility that will be nestled there in the woods. That won't destroy any trees, but what you see them doing is destroying a couple of acres of trees for parking lots and detention pond around the baseball field. And that's not a large enough area to make the feral hogs go wild, hog wild, so to speak, all around campus and the neighborhood. I think a lot of that is from the huge development just north of the campus that you see where it's clear cut all across the street from the campus. Okay,
Sharna has a question. She wants to know if you have seen the Lorax movie, and if you have, what are your thoughts on it?
I haven't seen the Lorax movie. I remember reading the Dr. Seuss book on the Lorax, but it's been so long ago. I'm sorry, I can't comment further on that.
Okay, the next one is a follow-up from Carrie, who asked you about your opportunities in life. And her comment/question is, it seems as if you did not have a central guiding principle except to do what made you happy and work hard at it.
Well, that's part of it. I'm also duty driven, and part of the scouting credo is leave a place better than you found it. So I hope where I've been that I've been able to leave it better than I found it. And the next person will do the same. So you see that continual improvement. But when I finish this book, I will get more active in different political movements. So wildlife corridors is something that's pretty near and dear to my heart.
Okay, another question is, can you comment on the differing plans from the current presidential candidates on global warming? Is that something you pay much attention to?
Oh yeah, well,
I'm not.
I don't think that our current president has much a plan on global warming at all. I think there's denial. Whether you call it global warming or climate change, the science is there. And so and I believe in the science.
Okay.
So without trying to get too political, that's the way it is.
The next question is from Bradley, and he wants to know if you have a favorite local arborist.
We've tried a really expensive one that I won't mention and won't go back to. And yeah, I have another one that's a local here in the Kingwood area.
Okay. This is from Heather, who's a biology professor here, and she says, it's so interesting, Heather, sure, hear about your experience in science in the 70s, and now at least 60% of biology PhDs are awarded to women. Did you feel the experience was different for you as a woman compared to the men at the time you were in research? Can you comment a little bit about the changes you've seen in your career?
Oh, sure. Sexual harassment was blatant back in those days. If you were a female in science, you definitely wore your white coat. White coat and shoulder pads was even better. That was that kind of would somewhat try to neutralize that field. I can remember one of my idols was Dr. Marion Diamond, who was from California doing a lot of amazing work on behaviors. And there were only a few women that were really notable in science that went to that level.
Katherine, the follow-up question to that is, what are one or two things you would say to our young people who want to get involved in science?
I can't imagine a more fascinating career, regardless of what aspect of science, what part of a STEM field you want to go into. And you'll see as you study more and more, the intersection of the sciences and the arts.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's not just siloed. And I think more and more university programs are offering wider experiences in that. Actually, when I was in college, my senior year it was called Southwest Texas State. It's now Texas State. My very favorite class I had to take as an elective was the history and philosophy of science.
Mm.
Professor that taught that had a combination MD and PhD and had a year sabbatical to go all over. He went to Asia, to the Middle East, and built a wonderful slide collection that he brought back into the classroom, talking about the very beginnings of science and different civilizations. That was fascinating.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because in 2 weeks, on November the 10th, we have Mel Conner, who is a MD and an anthropologist, PhD, and yet he's going to talk about religious belief, and that's interesting. So Jordan wants to know, do you think the forest fires in California, are we going to see as much damage under the ground as we will above the ground? Is there actually more damage going on underneath the forest floor?
I think time will tell. I think there'll be certainly there's bound to be some areas that are so hot that everything is scorched and dead. And there may be other areas where the roots are so deep that there's life underneath there. So time will tell.
Yeah. Okay, the next question is from your colleague, Raquel Henry. And I think this is an anecdote. She says, I remember Nellie Thorogood shooing the cows away from the library windows.
Yeah.
I guess that was under the other duties as needed in our contracts.
Yeah, yeah.
And the next question is from Susan Cotton. She says, I've seen pictures of buildings that are built in to include places to grow large trees on above ground levels. Have any of the architects that have submitted plans for new campus buildings suggested this kind of thought that you're aware of?
Like on the rooftops, on patio?
Yeah, I think something like that is what she's getting at.
Yes. No, none of them have. They look at us with the livable forest around, and that adds to the cost. And it's really, it's sad, but it comes down to how much can you get for the money you have. And when we pass a bond, that bond includes allocated money for buildings and parking lots that are just barely adequate when the bond was passed. And then you think about it'll take 3 to 5 years before you ever see a structure. And by then the costs have escalated. So you can't build, I mean, the Health Professions Center was slated to be 60,000 square feet, and it's 48,000 square feet.
Right.
And we've cut down drastically on the number of parking lots because of money. But no, in Oregon, you see a lot of the sustainable roofs on buildings. That's not really caught on in Texas like it has in other parts of the country.
Catherine, the next question is from John Samuelson. She says, Catherine, I was so glad to hear you talk about what happens when we strip trees, as we experienced flooding in Kingwood for the first time in 30 years. And about the wildlife on campus, I know you remember the deer we saw, especially at night in those early days. Thank you for all the work that you've done on the landscape of our campus and for your love of roses all over the campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan.
Yep.
The work's not done.
Yeah, no, it's not. Catherine, what is something a student could do here at Lone Star College-Kingwood to get involved with preserving the beauty of the campus that Joan just alluded to?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think Brian Schmaevsky heads up the environmental student club. And so that's one avenue, and devise a project, whether it's beautification of one part of the campus or another. We can also work with, and we have with the Rotary, the Humble Rotary has wanted to do a follow-up project in the Learning Garden to help us clean that up and make it even more beautiful and more, we envision that to be a community garden. And so I'd like to see that expand. Also, my successor will have to find funds for another vision if they share this vision, and that's at the Atascocita Center. You've got a big plot that could be used for a community garden.
That's true.
Gardens are benefit everyone. The main issue for a college is who's going to do the day-to-day oversight. So, yeah.
The next question is from Heather. How can we balance human development and forest preservation? It feels like there's nothing we can do about all the clear cutting. If, for example, all the development along 99 depresses me, do you have any ideas about this?
I've talked to developers about this, and landowners buy parcel of land and will sell it for a profit. They're usually working for families or corporations, and the developer that just paid the money for that is going to make sure that they're not going to lose money. So it's a whole value system change that has to happen. And that's not going to happen overnight. In Oregon, I'm a native Texan. So Texas is a very individualistic state. We take pride in doing just what we want to do, and we don't like anybody else to tell us what to do. And that's part of our ethos. Oregon was a very different place. In Oregon, you cannot subdivide your property and sell it and develop it, even though you own that property. The state places the highest value on maintaining their very valuable farmland, and then next they're forest and wetlands. And then they social engineer through their legislative policies that you can't develop an area around a city until it comes into a predetermined, mapped off urban growth zone. And when that urban growth zone, which we had right around the college that I oversaw, came into the development, it has to be developed at a certain density so that it makes sense to bring in public transportation. And so you don't see little fiefdoms here and there. I mean, it's really farmlands and wetlands and then concentrated growth. That was a foreign concept to me as a Texan. I learned to appreciate it and saw the value in it. But I don't know that something like that would take hold here. And if it'd take a long time for it to come to that. But again, it was really cool to see large elk just roaming up and down through these wildlife corridors. So it's a vision, and if we don't have the vision, then we have to have the collective willpower to push on our legislators to make some of those changes, because the ones who have the money for the development aren't going to do that. Their shareholders would skin them alive.
Well, Katherine, that pretty much ends our time for the evening. This has been wonderful to talk with you and to listen to you. Thank you so much. I'm sure everybody in attendance feels similarly. And this has been part of both our Writers, Speakers, and Ideas series, and also our faculty speakers group that Steve Davis and I host. And we want to thank you very much. So
thank you, John, Steve, Joan, Raquel, Heather, many other out there, and all the students. So thank you for chiming in tonight.
Be sure to follow us on social media at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Like this video, leave a comment, and hit that subscribe button to be notified about our latest content.